So the first dish we're making today is going to be a stone ground grit with wild mushrooms and bourbon sauce. So we're using local stone ground grits from Woodson Mills, beautiful product. Then we're going to cook those just really simply with water, salt, pepper, and butter. And then the sauce we're making is any sort of wild or forage for, or just like these cultivated mushrooms, a little bit of shallot, rosemary, bourbon, and beef stock. So it's a really cool appetizer, but it's also a great sort of hearty wintertime meal. So first thing to do is get the grits going, because that's going to take the longest. So these grits are a 3-to-1 ratio of wet to dry. So we're going to start with 1 cup of the dry grits, 3 cups of water, we're going to whisk that together really, really well. So we're just getting rid of the clumps there, any sort of clumps that can happen. And then we put it on high. We're going to bring that to a really rapid boil. As soon as it comes to a boil, we're going to reduce it to a simmer. And it's going to simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how creamy you like your grits. Some people like them a little bit firmer. I like mine really creamy, so we'll take these about 20 minutes. So we're going to prep our mushrooms. We've got some locally grown oyster and shiitake mushrooms. In season, if you can get morels, they're great, chanterelles, any sort of delicious fresh mushroom is great. At the restaurant, we save all of our mushroom stems and make mushroom stock, or we'll use them to reinforce a vegetable stock, so I always suggest that. And we like a little bit more just sort of organic look to our food. So with the oyster mushrooms, we just tear them into pieces. The shiitakes we'll slice, but that's just going to give different texture in the mouth and also for presentation on the plate. So we've got our oyster mushrooms. And our shiitakes. So these we're just going to julienne relatively fine. Shiitakes have a really delicious but pretty strong flavor. So I find that if you get them nice and thin, it disperses that flavor throughout the whole dish. We're going to mince 1 shallot. And then we're going to do about a tablespoon of rosemary. The rosemary with the mushrooms really is a nice addition, and it gives it a little bit more of a wintry sort of a feel. But tarragon is delicious, fresh thyme. So we're just going to make sure that we mince this really fine. When you're working with grits, it's important to make sure that you stir really regularly. 2 things that's going to do is it's going to help, once again, avoid those clumps, which can be kind of unpleasant to eat, but also it really helps get it creamier. Think like risotto, you know, so you're just constantly working those starches and getting everything nice and creamy. All right, so now that they're at a boil, we're going to make sure that we whisk them again really vigorously, and then we're going to reduce the heat to about medium-low. You want to make sure they're simmering, but also this is kind of a tricky point because sometimes those bubbles will pop, and if they get on you, they can burn you pretty good. So you want to make sure you're careful with that. All right, the rest of the ingredients for the dish are going to be beef stock. You can certainly use vegetable stock, mushroom stock, chicken stock, but we like the beef. It gives it a little bit heartier flavor. Bourbon. If you're not a bourbon drinker, shame on you. But brandy works, cognac works, but something high in alcohol for deglazing the pan. And butter is what's going to finish the sauce. Go ahead and get our pan really, really hot. You definitely want to use an aluminum or steel pan with this because you're trying to get as much what we call fond developed on the bottom of the pan. That's all that sort of brown bits and stuff that sticks and develops a ton of flavor. Those flavors concentrate in those brown bits. And when we deglaze the pan with the bourbon, that's going to lift all of that off, and that's going to really reinforce the flavors in the sauce. Just a little bit of blended oil. Let that get ripping hot. All right, then we're gonna add our mushrooms. We'll go ahead and salt the mushrooms. A little bit of pepper. So the way you're going to develop the most flavor from this is actually leaving it alone more than you might think. You really want to get some sear and some color on the mushrooms, and you want all of that stuff to develop on the pan, that fond that we talked about. You need to move them enough that they don't burn, but other than that, leaving them be is the way to go. Once you start to hear the mushrooms squeak, you're starting to see some color. They're moving a little bit of their liquid out. Go ahead and add the shallots. We're adding the shallots second because we want to get good color on the mushrooms, but we don't want to scorch the shallots. Once the shallots start to become translucent, we're going to deglaze the pan. If you're using anything high in alcohol when you deglaze, you want to make sure that you pull your pan off the fire so you don't run any risk of the fire going back in the bottle. I'm doing about 2 ounces of bourbon. I'm gonna add about 4 ounces of our rich beef stock. All right, we're ready to finish our grits. So you'll see right now, they're nice and creamy looking. They're not too thick. You do want them to be thick enough to have some body, but you don't want them to be too tight. I'm gonna season that with a good pinch of salt. Good pinch of black pepper. And a couple of tablespoons of butter. All right, once our stock's reduced by about half, we're gonna add our rosemary. Get that mixed in nice. And then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of butter to this. While it's hot, stirring the whole time. And that butter's gonna add creaminess to the sauce, and it's also gonna kind of help everything keep bound together. So you can see how beautiful that looks. Once you get to that point, you're gonna turn the heat off. So to plate, you're just gonna spoon your grits into the bowl. And then take the mushrooms, kind of pile them right in the center. And a little bit of extra juice. And that's it, stone ground grits with wild mushrooms and bourbon.